G'day community and welcome to another episode of the Jock MAILBAG podcast. My name is Damo. As usual, there is Clarky here as well. And we've also got a special guest which we'll introduce in just a second. But first, Clarky, how has your week been?
Hey Damo, next question.
Tell me.
I don't want to talk about this week. It's been a rough week, but let's get to our exciting guest because that's more better than me complaining.
Alrighty, so joining us is Big J from the Centre Bounce YouTube channel. Go and check it out. Me and Clarky are in a video there where we talked about things that are probably irrelevant now because it was before round 3, but he's still got awesome content going up pretty much every week. And Big J, how are you, mate?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem at all. So, Big J, we have a tradition on the Mailbag podcast where Patch, who is a very, very loud member of the Jock Reynolds here at Jock Reynolds, he always asks a question, and we always kick off the questions with his question. And sometimes his questions can be funny, and sometimes they can be actual, like, proper things to discuss. And his question this time is going for a point of difference like Dylan Moore or Jack Sinclair this early a bad idea? Or is it the time to be pulling crazy moves?
Point of difference players at kind of this time, I think are okay. Starting them, I think, can be a really big burn, and we've seen that a little bit with like early starts of guys like Parrish and a couple others. But when you actually start upgrading your team, having someone who's different can be a good thing. It probably just means that other people haven't jumped on them yet. So I wouldn't touch Dylan Moore with the 10-foot pole, but Jack Sinclair is definitely someone who, if I had an upgrade, upgrade a Bowie or someone, I would definitely bring in. I mean, he's got, 4 scores of over 100. He's a sure pick. At least it looks like at the moment.
And Clarky, with Jack Sinclair, are we worried about his scoring potentially getting a bit of a dip once the likes of Zach Jones or Hunter Clark return to that St Kilda side?
I think it's probably my biggest concern about Jack Sinclair, but, my brain is still emotionally hurt from Big J mentioning Darcy Parish burning pod owners because I own Darcy Parish and it's not good. But yeah, look, it's probably the biggest concern is that whether Jack Sinclair keeps that role going long term is the biggest question. Like I like to feel that we here on the mailbag, we're very firm believers in, you know what, sometimes making a crazy move, if you're comfortable with it and you've done your research and you know what you're backing in, like you know what you're going to expect, then by all means, leap of faith. I think Lekdog said it on the main podcast, if you haven't listened to that episode. But, you quite often see that a lot of people who sort of end up with top teams, they do take some calculated risks early because you're getting these people while they're on the up rather than waiting till they're at their peak and then going, all right, well, now it's time to upgrade and now it's time to bring in, Jack Sinclair at, 600,000 instead of, low 5s to mid 5s kind of thing. So, Patch, you love a crazy move. So I encourage you to make a crazy move because you love it. And I know that you love it and I love you. But for all other people, Jack Sinclair is definitely someone to watch. If you're going to back it in, just be aware of that being a potential to affect his long-term scoring. So if you're not comfortable with that, then it's not the right move.
And Jimmy Webster is going to miss this weekend's game in health and safety protocols. So Jack Sinclair may have an expanded role against, I forget who St Kilda are playing, but we will find that
Gold
out.
Coast.
Against the Gold Coast. Yeah, he'll probably score amazingly anyway,
yeah,
but
okay, doesn't matter. Scratch that.
But he'll probably have an expanded role this weekend with Jimmy Webster out as well. Big J, you mentioned Jake Bowie. Gavin Ward has asked, he's traded in Jake Bowie after round 2, but now he wants to know if he should trade him out or was it just a bad week?
Jake Bowie is definitely a bit of a polarizing player at the moment. Those who have him are trying to work out what to do. and those that don't have him are happy they've got Heath Chapman, or no rookie. So his 151 is out of his cycle this week. Unfortunately, he did score a 47, which will be in his scoring for the next 3 weeks. So looking at the Bryce Mitchell projections for him, I think he is going to drop in price, maybe to about 330. So if you had someone that you were really happy with upgrading to, like we just spoke about Jack Sinclair or someone else who you really like that is still cheap. I know some people are going after Sicily and a couple of other guys who are, just sub 100K. Maybe you've got some spare cash. He's a perfect upgrade. But yeah, if you just had him, I think I've got him at the moment, and he's not my biggest problem on field. So outside of spending a trade boost, I won't be touching him this week.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think Jake Bowie just had a bad week, to be completely honest. That game against Port Adelaide was awful to watch because of how low scoring it was.
Yeah.
And it feels like only really Max Gawn had a good game out of everyone that was on that field. So hopefully there's a bit of an increase from Jake Bowie this week. I don't know if he'll hit his break even, but there's every chance that this week will be a lot better than last week.
I know some people have mentioned the fact that Lever's come back into the side, and maybe that's affected Bowie's scoring a little bit, but we'll just have to wait and see with that. Give it a week or two. Keeping a rookie like him who can pump out 80s and 90s for a week or two, potentially losing 10 or 20K isn't such a bad trade-off.
Clarky, as a Melbourne fan, when Melbourne
I have opinions.
When Melbourne are at full strength, what role does Bowie play? Because it feels like once they get Lever, once they get Hibberd back, once they eventually get Salem back, what role is Jake Bowie going to be playing, and is it a Supercoach relevant role?
I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be playing a similar role. Even then, I think from a Supercoach perspective, I wasn't really kind of expecting to hold him longer than the duration of Salem being out. I think, and you mentioned it, the Port game, absolutely terrible to watch. Like, football skill wise, Max Gawn was playing out of his beard, and that was about it. And there were multiple opportunities that I saw where Bowie just was there and just didn't get the ball. Like, no one passed it to him, or he had a quick handball off, and then it was off to the races to kick it to a Port player, and then the Port player would kick it back to Jake Lever, who then it's all these little possessions that just aren't racking up points. I think more likely to what we'll see going on is that in this duration where he's kind of playing that role off halfback, they want the ball in his hands because he is very clean with how he uses it. His efficiency with the ball isn't the problem. But him and Angus Brayshaw seem to kind of be doing the same thing, where they're kind of trying to be there as a rebounding kind of defender to get the ball out quickly and efficiently to like an Ed Langdon or a God forbid, Jaden Hunt type player to move it forward. So I think Lever coming back in isn't so much an issue because Lever's still there to play tall intercept, and that's pretty much what he's going to do. He's not worried about the small stuff that Bowie and Brayshaw are kind of at the ground level to do. So yeah, my takeaway would be I think it was just a bad week, but that being said, the good week is only, 70 to 80, which is serviceable, but you got to remember that people who are bringing him in, you brought him in as he was always a stepping stone. We all knew that 150 was an anomaly, and he is a very talented young footballer, like so many players are, but he's not going to remain Supercoach relevant, I think, for the whole year.
That makes sense.
Good,
Mitch Santon has asked a question on Instagram. So we got a question on a platform that wasn't Twitter this week. What to do with Zach Butters? You hold Zach Butters. He was playing the Robbie Gray role. Robbie Gray should be back this week. The only reason he didn't play against Melbourne was because he got out of health and safety protocols that morning. Once Robbie Gray's back, Zach Butters is probably going to play an Ollie Wines role. And attend almost all the centre bounces, and he could score again. He could score like he did in round 2, having a role like that.
Yeah, I think we all know that Zach Butters has that role at Port, and he brings an X factor that Port sorely need. So playing him out of position at this stage, especially his second half was all right. His first half, not so much, but his second half was decent scoring wise. So if we can get a full game of production in that, then, that's, you're back to happy. But I think you got to hold him for at least one more week. It's not danger stations yet.
Yeah, and Big J, the last 2 weeks, Zach Butters has pretty much scored his entire score in the second half 2 weeks in a row. And it's almost like at halftime he's been reset or been given permission to sort of just do what he wants to or do what he needs to. And that's when we've seen the scoring production that we saw in the first 2 weeks. And do you think now that Robbie Gray is back and now that Wines is out and now that they've got potentially other players missing through other health and safety protocols that he could return to his round 1 and 2 scoring?
I think he could definitely return to that. I think with trading Zach Butters, I've got 2 things. So it's round 5 this week. You shouldn't be looking at trading or sideways trading the guys that you consider to be keepers. I don't think that's kind of the position that you should be looking at in your side, especially for someone who's Zach Butters, who, popped out a 140, I think, in round 2, so a couple of weeks ago. The second bit I have with Zach Butters is basically, if you look at why he scored the poor scoring, he basically got smashed by Powell Pepper, hence his 40 odd, and then this week Port got absolutely destroyed. So you've got 2 instances that probably won't happen again that he's actually scored poorly in. Sure, he's going to lose some money, but as you're saying, I think he can really bounce back. So he's monitor, but I wouldn't be sidewaysing Primo's out right now. I'm more concerned about generating cash and doing upgrades versus sideways trades.
Good point.
Should we move on to your question there, Big J? Because you asked me a question last week as I invited you onto the pod, and I said we could answer it here today. You asked if we were worried about the cash generation.
Mm.
And I've added a bit onto the end of this that says, so what tactics could potentially be used to ensure we have a steady cash flow? What were you sort of thinking in that sort of sense?
I'm looking at my team at the moment, and my forward rookies are doing okay. They're making money. I think a lot of people's are. But my midfield rookies, they're basically just gone home. At the moment I've got Ward and McDonald and then a loophole player in Owens. So hopefully Owens comes back at some point. Singular have had a lot of Sunday games or Saturday night Sunday games, so he's been okay for a loophole. But the other 2, in a couple of weeks, I actually want to start upgrading players and upgrading rookies, and I just don't see at the moment where that cash is going to come from. So the last couple of weeks, with them scoring so poorly, getting a couple of 20s and 30s, they've basically tanked their cash gen now. And they're not going to make us the money that we kind of were hoping they would make, especially a Ward who, we paid 180k for him versus someone like a Naish, for example, who's now going to be 300k probably next week. Similar to a Thomas Dow or Thompson Dow from Richmond, who you could have picked up last week at 198k and has already made 50 or 60. So my midfield rookies and cash generation, I think it's a huge issue this year. Yeah.
I think a lot of the upgrades are going to stem from the rookies in the forward line and the defense once we get them. But the other thing is we need to probably jump on the players as best we can as they're going to make the cash. So in a couple of weeks, we'll be able to jump on Braden Pruce, who's going to go through the roof. And that could be another situation like Riley O'Brien was and Mark Pitney was a few years ago. And then you've got the likes of, Hugh Dixon, who will probably get an expanded role with Nick Nui out. And then you've got Jack Hayes possibly coming in with Ryder out for 2 weeks. So I think I think the cash generation for upgrading your midfield is going to come from the other positions around the ground. As for Josh Ward and Connor McDonald, I still think that they can both, out of nowhere, pump out a 70 or an 80 and restart their cash generation. But like you said, I don't think they get to 300, 350k as quick as we would like. And having slow burns in your midfield is not an ideal scenario.
No, especially when, as we might get this week with Cripps being out, you don't want to have Cripps being covered by Josh Ward, who last week scored a 35. You would want someone who potentially can at least score a 60 plus to make it not hurt that much.
Yeah, Clarky, where do you sit on all of this?
So I think the secret is a healthy dose of constant anxiety. As someone who, I think currently my rookie situation is, as the kids on the TikTok say, sometimes it may be good, sometimes it may be shit. But, I think keeping track of and seeing where we get the debutantes as they come as well is going to be really important, because that's the biggest thing, is that I don't think I've missed any rookies that are severely affecting my season. I've got Nick Martin, I've got Hugh Dixon, I've got Jack Hayes, I've got Rochelle, I've got O'Driscoll now, I've started Brody, who is now looking like a keeper in the forward line of, and between Horn, Francis, and Dacos, those guys look like they might not even have to be upgraded until the very end. So I'm keeping an eye out for, Brisbane have been really good about it with, they've announced today that Kai Lohman is debuting this week and not as the medical sub. So, looking at someone like that and monitoring him over the next few weeks. So my main concern as far as rookie cash gen goes is, where are the replacements coming from? Like Kai Lohman, 121k forward rookie. So does he get more than 3 games even? Like, does he even make it to cash gen levels? So that's I think the biggest concern. So my tactic is kind of just making sure that I make the money where I can, and making sure that I'm keeping track of the performances of the debutants as we get them, because they seem to be a bit few and far between at the moment.
I know, for example, at the moment, I'm seriously considering getting rid of McDonald and Ward and bringing in like an Erasmus or an O'Driscoll, just kind of depending on how the structure of the team looks, to kind of restart that cash gen, with rounds 6 to 10 basically being when you start upgrading your primos, or upgrading to premiums when they've had a bit of a price drop. Having that extra cash gen going is really important, especially because if you say, I'm going to downgrade a rookie like a Rochelle in round 9, you want to have someone who's already made cash for the buy rounds to actually finish off your team. So even I'd be looking at the moment to actually drop anyone who you're not really happy with in that rookie position, who's kind of tanked their weeks for the next 3 weeks, tanked their cash gen, to actually look to upgrade to someone who's on the bubble. Heck, I almost thought about bringing in Thompson Dow this week. He's already gained 50k, but if he makes me another 150 or even 100k, it's a lot easier for me to spend a trade to downgrade him at 350 instead of holding Ward, who potentially I only make 70k on because I downgrade to a 123 guy.
I think the important thing that you mentioned there is structure. Structure is probably the biggest thing that you need within your team. Like, don't sacrifice the stability of your team as a whole as well, just chasing cash generation, but also realize that if your team already is unstable, then the economic flow going forward is what's going to stabilize you and keep you in it. Even if you feel like you're really far behind overall, if you're going for overall, or if you feel like you're a little bit behind in your leagues, you can still there's still so much in the season. Like, Supercoach memory feels like it's only a week long, but realistically we're 5 round, like this is round 5 in a really long season, so we've still got heaps of time to still correct those little mistakes and still make sure we're stabilizing going over to the next few weeks.
And we've had these worries in the past about cash generation, and everything is eventually worked out in the end. And Leckdog even says, don't trade unless there's an obvious option. And I guess with the potential lack of cash generation, I guess we sort of have to adopt that more and more this year, because unless there is an obvious option, then you probably don't need to trade. And Lek is also a massive advocate of trading late as well, so waiting for teams, seeing who is and isn't named, and then making your decision then and there, instead of doing it as soon as lockout ends after the round, and then being devastated by someone who you've traded in not actually being in the team once they're locked into your side.
I think also I've been hurt a lot in previous years with having dead rookies, so looking to not have that as much as I can. Look, kind of a review of my side last year identified that as being a really big problem coming into the later rounds when people get rested, or even during the bye rounds, that kind of thing. You want to have 18 playing if you can. So if I think Ward or McDonald aren't going to play for a while, I'd rather have someone who can kind of cement themselves into their side, and then I've got them for the whole year, or at least until the bye rounds.
So, Damo, this is my favorite part about having great guests on, is that we learn things like, I appreciate the approach of actually reviewing your team from last year and not making the same mistakes year in, year out, unlike some Clarky teams that are out there where I have banging my head against the wall repeatedly.
I look at my team at the end of the year and wonder how I can improve for the following season, and one of the things that I took away from last season was I needed to focus on getting my rookies off my field before I did any sideways or any upgrading movements, because I had no trades for the last 4 rounds or something of last season due to injuries.
Yeah, you did.
But making no moves, I went up the ranks a lot faster than I did actually making moves. So holding your team is actually sometimes better than making any moves at all.
I remember that end of last year, Damo, because you and I, we spend a lot of time together, as you can tell from our great podcast. But holy man, like I think you and I just we were riding the roller coaster for the last couple rounds of the season, which was awesome. Just to sit back and go, well, there's nothing we can do about it now. If the car blows up, the car blows up. Whatever.
Yeah.
And that, I think it's definitely something to remember. It's like, hey, it's okay to just be still, for a moment. Like, it's okay to not have to do anything, because sometimes other people will fall over ahead of you, and other times it'll all just work out. So, back yourselves in. We all spend a lot of time and put a little love into our own teams. So make sure that, you're just happy with it. Be happy with it.
We've got one more question. We'll move on from that,
I bet
because
we do.
I think we've talked about that as much as we need to. The last question is from Magic Gnome, and he wants to know if he should trade Patrick Cripps to Sam Doherty. We'll move on to the most traded out list, and we'll probably discuss any Cripps moves in that. So, Magic Gnome, if you're listening, you'll get your answer in this next segment. Number 1 traded out is Patrick Cripps. He's been traded out by almost 21,000 teams.
Boo, trading Patrick Cripps. Boo.
At the injury report from Carlton, he's only listed as 1 week. So I would take Carlton at their word there and hold him for that 1 week. It's if it turns into anything longer than that you probably need to look at your options.
I think Patrick Cripps of old would have played this week. And that was part of the problem, is that he never took time to recover from his sort of, the injuries, they build up, and he's like a really strong-bodied midfielder. Like, he's in there, and we love Patrick Cripps. Like, he plays hard and he plays good. I think it's kind of a little bit like taking an escape plan, like just throwing the smoke bomb down and then running, because it's 1 week. Missing him for 1 week isn't going to be the end of it, because then you have to bring him back. Like, how are you going to get him back? That's the biggest problem, is that, it's great you bring in Sam Doherty. I love Sam Doherty. I do. I think he's going to be a really good option later this season when I'm going to upgrade. He's one of the first people I'm looking at, but okay, that's fine. You've gone Cripps to Doherty. Do you go back? Like, you feel free to jump in, guys, but you've gotten rid of Cripps, and then Cripps comes back next week, and then you've got Sam Doherty, and that's great, but then you don't have Patrick Cripps anymore, and he comes and scores, 150 like he's been doing all season.
After this week, they do fly to WA to play the Dockers, so there is a chance that he misses a second week. But even if he misses a second week, I'd still be inclined to hold him. It's whether he misses that third week that you that maybe you look to trade him. But then but how many times can you go? Oh, it's one more week. It's one more week. It's one more week before you've had enough, and then you trade him. So I think if he misses any more than 1 week, that's when you trade him, regardless of when they say he's going to return. Because if they're going to keep saying it's 1 week, 1 week, 1 week, how long do you give Carlton to give a proper time frame?
I think a lot of people, I'm not surprised with that, 20,000 people number.
That's a lot as well. That's
yeah.
so many.
When you look at how many people traded him in round 2, I think it was basically that number as well. So he went down from something like 20% to, I think at one point maybe he was like 70% owned. Like it was huge, huge numbers. And he's always had an injury cloud over him because he missed, maybe he didn't actually miss it, but it felt like he missed a lot of games in his career, and people got burnt by bringing him in or having him. So him being out this week, like they've said, hey, it might only be a week, but I think that scared a lot of people off, and they'd rather just not have the headache there.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Like, as I've always said, I encourage everyone, like, make your decisions based on what you think is best for your team, because you take the time to listen to people like us to give advice, but at the end of the day, it is just that. But I will say at the same time that it does feel a little bit like confirmation bias, where you're sort of going, oh, well, Cripps always gets injured, and then he misses 1 week because of what seemed like a minor hamstring. It wasn't, didn't seem like it was like a massive injury. Yes, he needs the time to rest and things like that, but if they say 1 week, I wouldn't be surprised if he flies out to WA.
Something I've said in the past, especially with this year being a COVID-affected year, is that players are generally out with COVID for a week. And you wouldn't go and trade Gawn, especially now with all these forward rookies who are doing really well as R3s, but you wouldn't trade him out just because he's missing a week due to COVID. So if Cripps is confirmed that he should be back next week, you won't trade him out because similarly, he's only missing a week, right?
Yeah, and the problem I have isn't with the trade, like, just, sorry to rehash that, but just, I don't have a problem with the trade. I think the problem I have is that you're going to want him back. You brought him in because you back him in, so you're going to want him back. So is the trade necessary in the first place for the sake of 1 week? But then, Dame and I have covered this before. Some people play it differently for, league wins. Some people play it differently for overall, and that's totally fine.
Next on the most traded out is Mitch Hinge. That one I understand a little bit. He still has money to make as long as he lines up this week. If he doesn't line up this week, I understand the trade.
You're not in danger of Mitch Hinge scoring 160 points.
Next is Zach Butters. We've covered Zach Butters. Fourth is Jake Bowie. We've covered him. Fifth is Josh Ward. I still think that Josh Ward is a hold. I think is more of a hold than Connor McDonald.
I went early on trading out Josh Ward, to be completely transparent, pretty much for the reasons that you mentioned, Jay. Just it was too much of a liability, and I had the opportunity to get a better rookie, who I think I traded Josh Ward to Nick Martin, and that's kind of worked out for me. So I definitely understand why people won't want to back him in. And if you're making that trade to somebody who's like a rookie who's generally scoring better, you didn't have Martin, you didn't have O'Driscoll, you didn't have even Erasmus. I know, Damo, I don't know if you can give any insight onto Erasmus's job security, but it seems like he will be there as much as he can.
I have more faith in O'Driscoll's job security than Erasmus.
Good to know.
I think Erasmus probably makes way for Sarong or Tucker this week.
Yeah, there you go. So way for teams, but either one of those two I think is probably a good mix.
I think also, in your case, downgrading Ward was a downgrade and you made some money. Yeah. Versus I think a lot of people now have already got Nick Martin, those types. So him sideways to O'Driscoll's only going to gain you like 13k. And there's a big difference between that and, 80 or so from bringing Nick Martin in this week.
Number 6 is Matt Rowell. He seems to be playing a tagging role for Stuart Dew, and I understand trading him out. I wouldn't trade him out if you traded him in after his massive score in round 1, but if you started with him, there's definitely a chance to trade him this week. He's got an achievable break even, so you could hold him, and I think Jay disagrees with me here because he's just made a face.
Similar to Butters for me and Cripps, you don't trade out your guys that are 400k at this point in time. Maybe if you've got a spare 150 in the bank, you could upgrade. But for me personally, I've got Rowell and there's bigger issues on field. So unless you're spending a trade boost, which you don't want to do before you're actually properly upgrading your sides, it's definitely a hold. I mean, the guy's pumped out 2 scores of 100 already. He can do that again pretty easily. And I think it's going to come. He might not be a keeper for the year, but for right now, he's fine in my side.
My biggest worry with Matt Rowell is there were multiple times against Carlton where he clearly had a job on a player and he ran past the ball to stop the player affecting whatever the ball was going to be doing rather than hunting the ball himself. And if that's how he's going to have his mindset to when he's tagging, then I think I would prefer a ball-winning tagger than a stopper in my team, because there's a chance that he could score 120 or 50.
I think the biggest concern I have with the tagging role, and I'm also a Rowell owner, we know free off the chain Rowell is easy 120 point guy. No questions asked. Same with, even alongside Took Miller, because he plays a very different style of game. The problem I have is that Gold Coast won last week and he was playing that role. So I am very scared that it will continue. And I'm kind of in the park of Damo where it's one of those things. If that's your biggest problem this week, you're doing pretty well. You don't need my advice. However, I definitely agree with Jay where I'm holding because a 400k player, he's got the potential. You'd bring in someone for that potential, if it's just based on literally kind of a whim of if the second it's not working and they go, all right, you go do what you do best, then we're back to 100 plus. He's got an achievable break even, but yeah.
And to be fair, I did have that thought when he did start tagging against Melbourne, because it took them to a very, very close game. So I had in my head, okay, maybe he keeps this role, but at the moment it's not my biggest issue, so I'm not going to get rid of him.
Number 7 is Paddy McCartan. He did hit his head and has concussion history, but he was clear the next morning and there's no danger of him missing this week's game. So
that's people hitting the panic button. If out of everything that we've heard tonight, that's the one where I'm like, oh no, that's and kind of valid. I'm so happy that he's playing football though. So glad he was cleared.
Dylan Stevens is number 8. Well, if he doesn't come back for Sydney, then he's an easy trade. Hasn't made a lot of money, but he's an easy trade. Connor McDonald, he's only had a couple of price rises, but he did produce a 23 this week. But no Hawthorn player had a good game against St Kilda. Let's be completely honest here.
Oh yeah, that was.
Tom Mitchell got a ton.
Finally.
I love the irony of Hawthorn getting absolutely spanked is what it took for Tom Mitchell to go, maybe I should play some of that football there.
And number 10 is Tristan Sherry. For people trading out Tristan Sherry, I need to tell you, the reason he scored so badly was because he spent basically the entire third quarter on the bench trying not to bleed from his face.
Which you would say is arguably a good reason. Is it weird that on that list, the two that I disagree with the most are number 1 and number 10? I feel like the rest of in between we kind of covered where you can go either way, but just make sure that you back in your own strategy for doing it.
Yeah, the one I disagree with the most is Zach Butters, to be honest. But I mean, how do we know that this person trading out, or these people trading out Tristan Sherry, aren't upgrading him? Because he's 315k, his break even is 62. I mean, it's an achievable break even, but how do we know that 315k hasn't got this person up to an Isaac Heaney?
Yeah. No, that's definitely true. I wouldn't trade out Cherry. I think it's a mistake. He looks like the number one ruck at North, being a North supporter. He's not going to get pushed out of the role. And previous to this was his lowest score. So it's not like he's done this for 2 or 3 weeks kind of thing. Any player can get a head knock and be out on zero price or zero score. And that he was just unfortunate that had to him last week. So, yeah, I think it's a bit silly to hold him. One score of a 90 or 100, especially him versus Tim English this week and double teaming Tim English, I think it's achievable. He's just going to reset his scoring again. And some people I've spoken to are just going to keep him for the year because number one rucks, if you can grab him in the
That was
forward
actually
line, why
going to
not?
be my next question for you as a Northman. Do you see longevity and Cherry as an option? Is he going to sit there at F4 to 6?
I think there's definite possibility there. It just depends on how his scoring compares to someone like a Duncan or a Taranto later on in the season, where you'd rather have a guy scoring 120s instead of potentially a 90. But looking at North's team, he's out of contract this year. North's trying to find who the next ruckman is for their future because Goldie's probably got 1 or 2 years left maximum. And Cherry's going to play every week. So it's not like the role in scoring isn't there for him. I think it's silly to think otherwise at the moment.
On to the next segment, which is going through the tips and going through the captaincy options.
We love this.
Starting with Thursday night, Brisbane host Collingwood at the Gabba in the Good Friday Eve clash. I think this is going to get pretty ugly for one team. I'm giving Brisbane by 33 points, and I think you got to slap that vice captaincy on Lockie Neal if you have him.
I hope Mitch Robinson decapitates Jordan. Sorry, you can cut that. Sorry. Fuck.
Also in this game is Brodie Grundy as well. Brodie Grundy will be up against Oscar McInerney. It could be another big score there for Grundy, and then the likes of Jack Crisp, if he wants to pump out another 132, is another outside the box option. But as a VC, you probably want to just make it easy on yourself and go for a Grundy or a Neal.
I would like to bring something up actually, since we haven't touched on it. We need to give you a new nickname, Damo, because last week you did tell me that Nick Dacos was a VC option. I doubted you, but you came through with many predictions from last week, so I am now dubbing you Nostradamo.
I also said that Carlton wasn't a foregone conclusion against the Suns.
You did say
and
that.
I had no. What, I think I said something else as well.
Yeah, you tipped Port. Betrayal.
Ouch.
I think I'll have to do a replay on that because
How does Grundy go against two rucks? Has he been having trouble with getting bullied? Because they don't really have someone else. I don't think Darcy Cameron's doing much these days. How does he kind of go against two rucks?
He doesn't do too badly, but Mason Cox has been named in the side.
Okay.
Good Friday games. North Melbourne take on Western Bulldogs. Western Bulldogs should win that one, you would think. Sorry, Jay.
I hope not. I hope Sydney's games kind of lit the fire. The biggest problem with the Bulldogs this year, if you've been watching the games, is their forward line doesn't kick a lot of goals. Bruce being out puts a lot of pressure on Norton, that kind of thing. And their defense lets a lot of goals go through. So I think North's kind of got them covered on both of those areas. It's just going to be the delivery going in from the midfield to either side of the ground.
Yeah, I think, look, Western Bulldogs, they've had a rough run of it. I also, low-key, would love to see North just get a sneaky one against them, just because that's kind of funny for me, and it follows the tradition of a team getting broken by a grand final.
Vice captaincy options out of this is Jack McRae, Josh Dunkley. Aaron Hall.
Oh,
Maybe.
yeah.
I'd actually be worried about putting vice captains against North. With Greenwood and a couple of other players doing some pretty significant tagging roles. Similar to Lockie Neal, they basically kept him to no score until 10 minutes of junk time in the end of the Brisbane game. So one of the big mids will get tagged. It just depends on which one it is. I think it might be McRae because Bontempelli is going to move forward a little bit. So I'd be a little bit wary about keeping him as VC this week.
You know what? That is something that I did have in my mind that I feel like Jack McRae is always an obvious VC or C option. However, I for some reason have it in my brain that Jack McRae, I feel like he maybe feels like either gets, whether it's a tag or whether it's just, running against an opposition that maybe feels less challenging. Sometimes doesn't score as well as you'd probably expect him to. Like you might not expect a 200. So I think it's definitely a concern. But still, I mean, it's a VC, so roll the dice if you're looping.
The next game is a Good Friday night game. West Coast host the Sydney Swans. West Coast will be without Nick Naitanui, but are likely to have their entire midfield available. So it's a matter of whether Bailey Williams and Hugh Dixon can do the Nick Naitanui thing and give Sydney a bit of a test.
I'm going to play my own Nostrodamo and call an ambush in the West. Sydney are going to win this one.
I've tipped Sydney as well.
Yeah, they're my pick as well. I think they're just going to slaughter them.
Ambush in the West. Get them.
Moving on to the Saturday game, St Kilda host Gold Coast. St Kilda will be without Brett Ratton, so it will be Brendan Lade as an interim coach. And we all know what's happened when there's been an interim coach. That team has won, so St Kilda should win this one.
Yeah, and they're probably riding high after that demolishing last week, or as I described it earlier, a spanking. Jack Steele, obvious captain option. Took Miller, always captain option.
I'm tipping Gold Coast this game.
Ooh.
I think they're going to come out. I think Steele's probably going to get tagged. He doesn't do well with the tag. Maybe
by
it's
Matt
Rowell,
Rowell.
maybe it's
God
someone
damn
else. But I'm picking Gold Coast. I think they're going to go for it this week.
Well, Jay's called his own ambush in in Marvel Stadium. It's at Marvel though. Gold Coast, they don't travel particularly well, do they?
I'm not sure. All I know is they beat Carlton, and I think they've actually got a point to prove. Even with Ben King, is it Ben or Max?
Max.
I would have loved to see the brothers playing this game against each other, but yeah, I think they've got a point to prove, and they're going to go for it. So they're my sneaky tip.
I think if last week exemplified anything as well, it's not that hard to convince me to tip Gold Coast because they're kind of my feel-good team.
Next game is Adelaide and Richmond. One thing about Adelaide that I've noticed this season especially is with Darren Burgess now there, they are incredibly fit and can run out games incredibly well.
The man does work good stuff.
It's at Adelaide Oval, and I think I'm actually going to tip Adelaide as my roughie.
I have also tipped Adelaide because it is at Adelaide Oval, and even though Richmond did play a particularly good game last week, I feel like Adelaide have a lot of really exciting young talent that I think is just ready to blossom. I'm also low-key loving Ben Keys. I think as probably like a sneaky little captain, vice captain option because he's been really quietly putting together just a really good Supercoach season and just a good season in general.
And Rory Laird has been quite impressive since returning from his hand injury as well, so he's another option and could go quite large with Richmond not really putting hard tags or hard stopping opposition midfielders all that well.
Yeah, Adelaide's my pick for this game. I think they're just going to run Richmond out of legs, and when the Richmond fans start going, they definitely start going. So that backing there is really going to push the young players to do really well.
And the men's team has to do well now that the women have just won another beautifully won championship again. Sad day for the Demonettes. Daisy Pearce, you'll get your premiership next year. But yeah, they're loving it over there. So I mean, step up, Adelaide men's.
Then Clarky, your boys Melbourne take on the Giants. Melbourne should win this, but
God,
the
I hope we
Giants
win.
can pull one out of a hat.
Stop it! No, no, I'm going to this game with a GWS supporter, my brother-in-law, and I don't know if I can emotionally handle the loss of both Christian Petrarca and Clayton Oliver when they're put in the pockets of Lockie Ash and Matt De Boer, respectively, and then taken back to New South Wales. I don't know what we're going to do, but it should be an interesting game. I think Max Gawn probably against it'll be either Flynn or Breeks. Who knows with Leon? It could be maybe Phil Davis will come back and you'll throw him in there or something. It'll be an interesting game. I've obviously tipped Melbourne. Max Gawn is probably my pick. He's my pick, my captain pick for the week, I think.
Yeah, I think Melbourne's going to win, but I think Oliver and Petrarca are going to have low games, so I wouldn't pick them. As you say, maybe a Gawn would be a fantastic pick, considering he's just coming off a 160, and he's probably going to have to try and carry this game a little bit more than he does because the other midfielders are getting tagged. So I think he's going to go big.
Yeah, I know that we've kind of moved past the talking about Supercoach performances, but I think last week from Gawn, even in a poor game, it's kind of what I've been saying about Gawn for a while now, where when his skill use and his ball use is really good and he's got that confidence, like he's making the marks, he's doing the ruck, he's, getting intercepts, he's kicking goals, or out on the full as whichever the situation may require. He's still easily like a top tier scoring machine.
Definitely true.
Moving on to Sunday, Carlton take on Port Adelaide. Is this the game that Port Adelaide finally get their first win of the season? Or are Carlton going to return to how they were in the first 3 games?
0-5. 0-5. 0-5.
I think 0-5's coming. I think Carlton's going to win. They're going to win pretty easily. Port don't have tall defenders. Carlton have 2 good key forwards. They're going to kick probably 3 or 4 each pretty easily this week, even with Alir potentially coming back. I don't think he can stop both at the same time. So
Carlton as well need to probably win back some of their pride after last week.
After last week, Carlton. I've tipped Carlton. I would love Port Adelaide to get off the mark, but Clarky, me and you were talking earlier, and Port Adelaide probably have one of the least balanced lists in the competition.
Yeah, it's their star power is limited, and then I couldn't name a single player who isn't Alir outside of the main midfield people, because I do love Alir. Wonderful young defender. It's basically Ollie Wines, Travis Boak, now Zach Butters, and then I couldn't tell you a single thing about the Port. Sorry to any Port fans that might be listening, but it's almost unremarkable when compared to a lot of other teams.
Yeah, crazy to think they made it to the semi-final last year. So the talent's pretty even across the board. But I agree with you. Like, there's not a lot of superstars there who seem to put the game on their back, especially in the forward line. They're really missing is it Dixon who's out? They're really missing Dixon out. Yeah.
Next game on Sunday is Essendon versus Fremantle. Fremantle have been talked up in the media, so I'm expecting Essendon to win quite comfortably.
I am torn.
I've tipped Fremantle because I can't not tip Fremantle, but because they've been talked up in the media, I'm expecting Essendon to come out and completely mess.
Is Sean Darcy playing this week?
He is.
Okay. So if you kind of analyse the teams, Essendon have an okay ruck. You guys have Darcy. Essendon don't really have a forward line. You guys have good defenders. Yeah, I'll tip Freo to win. It might be a close game, but I'll tip Freo to win this one.
Essendon doesn't need a forward line when you have 2 meter Peter. I'm really
That's
torn.
actually my biggest worry.
He's honestly, I think he is very. No, I don't want to say underrated, but I think he's just he's definitely taken that forward line and kind of chucked it on his massive shoulders. Just because I think, he's just such a dangerous target and he's really hard to defend with just the pure size that he is. I think, when in terms of tipping who's going to win, I'm really torn on this one. I've switched between Essendon and Fremantle probably a couple times. I kind of think Freo are on a bit of form, so I think they might come over here and do all right, or possibly the cold air might freeze them, and Essendon are just going to run over the top of them.
You look at the betting, and it's gone like Essendon $1.88 to Fremantle $2, and there's been like Fremantle $1.90, Essendon $1.95, and then it's been like Essendon $1.90, Dockers $1.95. So the bet,
people don't know what to make of this game.
The punters don't know.
I
think it's going to be a game decided within a couple of kicks.
Yeah.
But it's also going to be the resurrection of Andy Brayshaw. Come on, baby! I need a non-tag game.
I don't see it happening. Andrew McGrath's been tagging, and
has he though?
They're going straight to him.
He's quote unquote tagging.
Well, he's been doing something that makes other midfielders from opposition teams score poorly. So even if it's a run with Rowell, Brayshaw's proven that he can't handle the pressure. So if he's got a team,
he has scored 90 mid 90s the last 2 weeks with a tag, so he doesn't completely shut down.
Who did they play 2 weeks ago in Freo? I'm in Perth.
West Coast.
Do you mean
West Coast? I think Nelson tagged him for half the game.
Yep.
And then he did have a 70-point quarter.
Yeah.
But that first half of the game, he finished halftime on 26.
So he also only had about 6 disposals, I think, in the first half.
It's not a great sign.
He doesn't completely shut down though. And that's the best thing. When sometimes if a player can't handle a tag, they completely shut down and then are completely worthless. Andy will try and fight through it. Will try and fight through a tag, and he'll put himself in positions to try and get the ball, even if it means he doesn't get a clearance. He puts himself in positions to get a handball receive, something like that, which then frees him up a bit more to get the ball rolling. So a 96 and then a 95 while being tagged is not too bad.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree. He has those times when he gets like 8 or 9 points just in a quick spurt and then will go missing again and then do that again. So I agree with you that he does work through a tag in that sense.
Last game of the round is Easter Monday game. Hawthorn take on Geelong. This game could be another ugly one.
I have tipped Geelong by like 40 points, something like that. Look, I think Hawthorn have shown a lot of improvement. Don't get me wrong. But Geelong just, love them or hate them, they've just got that polish about the way they play football. Yeah. And that's just going to overrun probably an unprepared Hawthorn.
I think Chris Scott's going to come in and he had a look at the last game and Hawthorn got shut down and he's going to do the same to them this week. I'm definitely tipping Geelong for a big score as well.
And Patrick Dangerfield is a good captaincy option out of this one but I don't recommend leaving your captaincy until the last game of the round. And both of these teams, while there are good Supercoach options in them, there is nothing that stands out from a captaincy point of view.
Yeah, even Dangerfield, I would probably say, has to be a last resort because he's been putting up some poor scores, but he's always got that, pardon the pun, danger about him, where he's just going to have 1 week where he scores like 180 and then go back to 80s.
And Patrick Dangerfield does love the big stage, so the Easter Monday game previously has been a stage for him to have a big score, so it'll be interesting to see what sort of scores come out of this game because there's not a lot of Supercoach relevancy apart from Patrick Dangerfield, really. And then you've got the likes of Josh Ward and Connor McDonald, which hopefully stay in this team and hopefully have good games. But
Sicily, Tom Stewart are probably those who started Hawkins. Those wild few people who I absolutely adore.
All right, and then we're done. So
Been a good one this week. I love having guests.
it's been a longer one than usual too. So
Yeah, and we even got the guest to bring his own question, which is literally the equivalent of "I'm throwing a party. Please bring a bowl of chips."
yes,
I posted all over like the Facebook groups and stuff I'm in. So I thought some of them maybe would have sent something in, but I know Magic Gnome, so I got him to send something in. Yeah,
we love
excellent. You can find Big J on his YouTube channel, The Centre Bounce. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, no worries, guys. Thanks for having me on.
And Clarky, again, thank you.
Oh, I love you, big boy. It's good every week.
All right, community. We'll see you next week.
Love you guys.
Bye.